Hello everyone! Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 1, which is the introductory chapter to our textbook. And today we're going to be talking about first the benefits of public speaking, then we'll get into some models of communication, the elements that fit into those models, and then types of speaking and speaking occasions. So first of all, let's get into the benefits of public speaking. And there's really three overall main benefits to public speaking. The first of which is personal, and we will get into this more in chapter 17 with special occasion speaking, and you'll actually have an assignment to correspond with that chapter. But briefly, personal speaking can be something like providing a nomination for another person in an award. It can be giving a wedding toast. It could be delivering a eulogy. It could be accepting an award, so you're like Taylor Swift accepting a music award on MTV or something like that, okay? Then we get into professional, and I think this is what we think of most when we think of public speaking and communication as a discipline. And our textbook says that 70% of jobs today include some form of public speaking, and I think that's really true because every time or most of the time you see a job posting, what is one of the top things that that job requires? Good communication skills, excellent written and verbal communication skills. They may stress one more heavily and one less depending on what type of job, but I think there's always some type of communication included in that job posting. So public speaking really plays a big role in our careers and how we communicate with our colleagues and those above us and those externally, like if you're a salesman or a lawyer or those types of things. So hopefully you will get some benefits of public speaking, not only personally but professionally. And then we also have this public, which is democratic participation and critical evaluation in society. And I think where you'll see this the most in our class is with critiques. So you're going to be doing 3 peer critiques for speeches 2, 3, and 4. And then you're also going to do a self-critique for your speech number 2. So that's where you're going to be able to analyze and objectively critique your classmates and yourself in regards to public speaking. And you'll see in our chapter 2, the origins of public speaking, how that democratic participation part really fits into the puzzle, because public speaking was pretty much the basis for law and government and all of those things, and expressing your ideas and your opinions. So you'll understand a little bit more about public as we go through our text. Next, we will talk about the models of communication. And the basic model of communication started as a linear model. And you can see here with this line, it means you start here with what we call a sender, and you're sending a message to a receiver. So this is a one-way ticket, right? You're sending a message, the message is received and interpreted. But what are we missing there, right? When you're sending a message, are you also getting feedback at the same time? So maybe if I were giving a lecture to you in class, you would be shaking your head yes, and that is giving me some nonverbal feedback. So really, we saw that there's a problem with the linear model of communication, and now we've moved way ahead into the transactional model of communication, where we really know that messages are sent and received simultaneously, and that's a key word there for the transactional model of communication. The sending and receiving of a message happens simultaneously. And this is where our text adopts the terminology of communicator, meaning that there is not really just a sender and a receiver, but that there is communication and there are communicators within the context of the communication. All right, and then moving here into the elements of our communication process, you can see there's this encoding and decoding. So encoding is how you convey the message. So if you are the speaker at the time, you are the one presenting a message, you have to think in a code, right? So like English is our predominant code. You would be thinking in a code and figuring out how to spit that out of your mouth. So it's like your brain is a machine figuring out how to encode a message. On the flip side of that, the receiver, the other communicator, right, is then decoding that message. And we know that misinterpretations can happen if the encoding was not done well enough for that particular audience member to decode. It's like that game of telephone, right? Where you tell your neighbor something and then maybe the message is a little different or way different. That is the process of encoding and decoding. It's the responsibility of that sender, that first communicator, to make that message understood in the correct meaning. So communicator, again, the people that make up the interaction there. And the message is what actually comes out of your mouth, what actually is texted, those kinds of things. The channel is the vehicle of the message. So I just said texting. That could be your phone. That could be a voicemail. That could be you face-to-face. That could be you emailing. So the channel is how that message is sent. Noise, we can have physiological noise, we can have psychological noise, physical noise, and cultural noise. All right, so first we're going to talk about physiological noise, and that's stuff that may be distracting from your message within your body. So maybe it is 11:45 and you skip breakfast, so you're pretty hungry, and all you can think about is what you're going to have for lunch. So that might be distracting you from the message you should be receiving and interpreting. Maybe you're really tired, you were up studying really late the night before, so your tiredness is hindering how well you're interpreting a message or how much of the message you're getting. Those are two examples of physiological noise. Now let's think about psychological noise. So psychological noise is what's within your head. So perhaps you have a biology exam in the afternoon and you wish you would have had a little more time to study for that one. So you're pretty stressed out about how well that exam is going to go, and that's distracting you from your public speaking lecture today. Maybe you just broke up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and the emotional stress of that is hindering your communication that day. Maybe you're really sad about something that happened last week, and you're trying to deal with that, and that's kind of clouding over the message. Okay. Then we have physical noise. So this is like when you're taking a test and someone in the back row is tapping their pencil or tapping their pen or tapping their foot, and it's really annoying you and distracting you from taking your test. Or someone's chomping on their gum and all you can think about is them chomping on their gum and not the message, okay? And then we have cultural noise. And cultural noise we'll get into a little more later in our global discussion of communication, but cultural noise are things like maybe a language barrier or a dialect barrier where you're distracted by some cultural aspect of the presentation or the message, and you're less focused on the actual content of the message. All right, so now we're going to take a look at some of these models. So this is the transactional model of communication, and this is what we end up with, okay? So let's look at the difference between transactional and our linear model of communication. So the linear model is pretty simple. It's just the sender, and the message goes through a channel and hits a receiver. Okay, but we know that we need more out of this, and we have all of these worldviews over here that influence all of this transactional model, which is what we're going to talk about next. Okay, but here we have our communicator and our communicator, and we have this context where the message is happening. Okay, so for instance, at UW, University of Wyoming, where I taught public speaking, I taught in the same room that I took public speaking 4, 5, 6 years prior. Okay, so is that the same context? I was getting the same message, the same material, but in a very different context. I was going from the student to the teacher. So the context can really influence the message, right? So here we have a sender with all of these worldviews, and maybe their cultural worldview is very different than the receiver. Could that cause some noise? Yes, some cultural noise, right? And here is our message coming from here to here. This person is giving some feedback. So sender, receiver, they are the communicators giving feedback through a certain channel. So maybe they were texting, maybe they were emailing, maybe they were talking face to face, right? So that's the transactional model. And if you think about this, it's like going to the bank and going to an ATM, right? You're putting in your card into the ATM, punching in some numbers, and what is the machine doing at the same time? It's locating your account, pulling out funds, and then giving you the cash. So something is happening at the same time that you are doing something on the machine is calculating too, right? So same kind of thing for communication, the sender and receiver, the messages are simultaneous. All right, so we jumped around a little bit. We talked about context just a second ago when we talked about me teaching versus me as a student, right? So the context can really influence the message. Maybe you are in an auditorium without a microphone and you have to speak very loudly. That would be the context. Or maybe you're in a panel interview and you have to make sure that you are addressing each of the people on the panel. That is a very different context than if you were just addressing one person on a panel, right? So those are just some examples of context. So next we will talk about worldview, and there are 5 components of a worldview. And worldview is the overall framework which an individual sees, thinks about, interprets, and interacts with the world. And then there are these 5 components, right? And epistemology is the way that we acquire knowledge and are what counts as knowledge according to your textbook. So acquiring knowledge, what we really see as knowledge. Then we have an ontology, which is basically our belief system. And these are a little bit tricky, right? The difference between ontology and axiology. So our beliefs are different than our values, right? And that is what axiology focuses on. And we'll talk more about the difference between ontology and axiology and how those play into persuasion. Then we have cosmology, and that's our relationship with the universe and other people, and maybe that really influences our worldview in certain contexts, okay? And then we have praxeology, which is our preferred method of completing everyday tasks. So all of those things play into our worldview, how we interpret a message, how we view the context, our communication, our encoding, our decoding, all of those things. So all of them play together in the communication process as a whole. All right, guys, and last but not least, today we're going to talk about speaking competencies. So this is basically the structure of how we're going to write our speeches and the steps that go into creating a speech. In a brief overview, we'll very much get into these in more details in later chapters. But first of all, when giving a speech, you have to think of a useful topic that matches the prompt, situation, and context of the speech, right? Then you need an engaging introduction. Without an engaging introduction, you have a really hard time maintaining interest with your audience members, right? You also need clear organization so that your message is very, very clear. There's no misinterpretation, there's no problem with the decoding of the message, right? Clear organization is going to be key, and we'll work with organizational patterns throughout the semester for various assignments. You'll also need well-supported ideas, and when we think about well-supported ideas, it's typically just research that we think about now, right? But I want to pull in some personal experience, some analogies, descriptions, those kinds of things to supplement that research, right? So our first 2 speeches, we will have no research. It's all going to be based on your own personal knowledge and any connection you can make with your audience to have them really understand something that you're an expert on. All right, then we need closure in our conclusion. So we really want to know when a speech is finished, and we want to feel like there's been a bow tied around our speech, right? So we need closure in our conclusion. We need clear and vivid language, again, to keep our audience engaged, to keep them on the same page and make our message very well understood. You need suitable vocal expression. So those monotone speakers, we want to avoid that because we know how hard it is to listen to that, right? So you want suitable vocal expression. You also want it to match the severity or lightheartedness of the message, right? You want corresponding nonverbals. So if you're saying yes, you don't want to be shaking your head no kind of thing. That's a very basic example. But you want your corresponding nonverbals to very much match your message. You want everything to be so adapted to the audience, so everything should be relevant and suited to them. You want to use adept visual aids, which will have a whole chapter on visual aids, and you want to use convincing persuasion when that general purpose calls. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our origins in chapter 2. See you soon.